heart and an invitation, God is instantly present. A lovely prayer. Here's something I want you to know about me. I am a deep end of the pool kind of gal. If there's some elephant sitting in the middle of the room, send Margie Hyatt in to talk about it. Yes, indeed. And we stand in a moment with an opportunity to be in the deep end of the pool together and to speak about the elephant. Humans don't want to look at death very much, and yet it is a process of life, and it's very healthy when we're confronted to be in the deep end of the pool, to step right in to whatever it is, rather than close our eyes to the experience. There are two reasons I wanted to bring this talk to our community this morning. One, there's a woman who regularly attends the 8 a.m. service that for months, had been asking Sky to speak to the subject of death and unity teachings. How in our movement do we view this great experience of life? And the second reason is the obvious. We are in the midst of it as an ohana, as a family. And it serves each of us individually, and it serves our community as a whole to be able to speak of it and to face it and to live in the experience of dying. There's a quote from the book Illusions, the author Richard Bach, that has always given me great hope in the face of what seems the end. What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the master calls a butterfly. So who do you think's the caterpillar in this story? Us humans, moving along slow in our life, trying to do the best we can to be expansive, but we're wrapped in this funny body, and it doesn't always seem smooth and easy. Sometimes living feels downright difficult. But there comes a point when the caterpillar spins its cocoon and rests in a period of time, then breaks free into a new experience, breaks free to soar, breaks free into the beauty of its new form of living. I'd sign up for the butterfly gig, yeah? Yeah, that works pretty good for me. As humans, we struggle about this issue of death and dying. One of the things that was very comforting to me and made great sense to me when I first came into Unity is how we talk about the language we have around dying. And it poses questions for us. Where are we with this issue? Are we wondering what comes next? Are we hopeful that the promises in the scriptures and other master teachings, that there is more than just this experience? We're hopeful, but maybe we're not quite sure. Or are we even afraid that the promises are not true? But in Unity, we are so certain that there is more coming, more to our experience than just this human life, that we refer to it with a word that is a delightful, energetic verb. We call it transition in Unity, which is a process of change, a shift of energy, a transforming experience. Well, if I'm changing, shifting, transforming, am I transitioning to, or am I transitioning from? From or to, which is my direction? Yes, both and. When we move from this process of living, we simply take a path into the next process of living, and our hang-up is we don't really quite know what that looks like. There's no scientific evidence or explanation. There's lots of helpful anecdotal experience. You Google life after life, and you will get a whole list of resources for experience of what has happened to people moving from the body into the next experience and then perhaps returning. That anecdotal experience seems to be evidence, for the scientists in the room, evidence of what we can expect coming next. But we're still, kind of not so sure. And why are we in fear in our lives? Psychologists have said, and a teacher of mine who was a psychologist a couple of decades ago was fond of saying humans are most afraid of two things: death and public speaking. Must not be too afraid of the latter. And I'm not so very afraid of the former. And I'm grateful for that. Current psychology, if you my friend Googled during the week, if you Google what humans fear most, there's umpteen lists, and death makes every list. But I chose one published in Psychology Today that says one of our top fears, the number one, is extinction, that we cease to exist or that we experience death. Now, the truth is, this body will come to an end, but we are so much more than this body. We are the energy, the life, the love, the essence of God itself, captured in our little caterpillar nests, yearning to step into butterfly nests. We just don't know it because we're so invested in this process. I mean, I happen to love the juicy experience of being a human and having lived several decades and lots of experience. Some I'd call really good, some not so much good, but they were all a package that at this moment I stand and say, I love my life. Is there anybody in the room that would join me in that? I love my life. Yeah. And so, I get the whole topic of death, and it's just the next thing that comes on the road to me. I don't know that I'm so eager, but I'll be ready when that time comes. Or at least I like to think I will, because I'm comfortable with it. We also fear the ego death. Now, public speaking would fall into this category because we fear humiliation and we fear self-disapproval and the disapproval of others. We don't want to stand in that icky place of intense discomfort for something we've done. It's just natural. But our fear does not have to rule our living. Our fear about anything does not have to be in the driver's seat. And I invite you especially that your fear about dying not control your living. Because that's often the result. If we fear what comes next, it makes us constrict and contract in the process we're living in now. So I'd like to invite us all to imagine that the next stage is butterflying, and you will be in delight at that, however it shows up for each of us in our experience. Myrtle Fillmore spoke wonderfully to the basic thrust of the Unity teaching. She was writing a letter to a woman whose son had died, and of course, the mother was in deep grief. I'm not telling you not to be sad when you lose someone. We have the feelings we have of loss and separation. And when we go through them, hopefully more quickly we can come to that sense of peace to know it's just a change in frequency. Now, I listen to 105.1 all the time. I do know there are other frequencies on that radio dial, but they don't call to me, and I don't care to tune into them. But I know they're there, and I might change my mind someday. And when someone takes that step through the doorway we call death to their butterfly nests, all they've done is dialed in a different frequency. The truth is, I believe this wholly and completely, they are just as available to us in that space when we become clear of the truth of living and dying being one circular process, then that other frequency can be as available to us as if they were right here. So if I start spouting physics, you'll know that I have really dialed in on the frequency of my husband who's over there in the cosmic physics lab. If I start singing like a cabaret entertainer, you'll know I've dialed in Sky St. John. And wouldn't I be thrilled about that? Yeah. They are still present. Their energy is alive and vibrant and at peace and in complete joy. And if we come to know that, then our life loses this tension, this fear of what comes next. Myrtle. I forgot Myrtle. I got so carried away. Let me share with Myrtle. You will learn that those who go through the change called death are really passing through a transition. The soul giving up the body temple, which for some reason or other it can no longer express through or bring to health. That's all. It's making a change. I think that word transition is just so evocative of what will come someday for all of us. You know, there's no getting off this planet alive. And I firmly believe this, that if it's our time, which is coded in our soul perhaps, there is nothing we can do to avoid the means by which we will leave the planet. We may not be conscious it's coming, but if it's our time, folks, we're on the bus and out of here, as Levitt would say. And if it isn't our time, then there's nothing we can do to leave early. Nothing we can do but follow what our soul's message is about this life and moving in transition to the next life. One of the authors that's been incredibly helpful to me in my understanding about death and dying is Neale Donald Walsch. He authored a collection of books, Conversations with God. And within this particular book, Home with God, which is the whole book, is about living and dying and understanding the eternal nature of our being. Now, here's a fact science does give us on this topic. What scientists will tell us is that energy cannot be destroyed. We are energy. We are the light and love and essence of God itself packaged up in our nice little our human suit, so that we can live this juicy life as fully as possible, to expand our understanding of what that means to be the essence of God and experience it as fully as possible. The whole journey is to carry us forward to the fullest experience of our Christ consciousness, our God nature, that we can achieve in this body. And if we don't get very far up the mountain this time around, that's okay. We move into the process of dying, and we move back into the process of living. Now, reincarnation is a whole other topic. We'll leave that for some future point. But Unity doesn't teach reincarnation as a doctrine, but Charles and Myrtle believed it was the process of our soul to move ever closer to the fullest expression of the Christ that is the template of our divine nature. These qualities of God that are present in us in all the time, the creative force that we are living in our lives, moving on the planet, being human, working to be more than the caterpillar, striving to experience a little butterfly now, thank you, so that we can say, I love my life. Neale Donald Walsch says birth and death are the same thing. What? He presents this as spiritual truth, not just a pleasant idea, but something we can trust. I've had two experiences that brought that together. First, I was kind of an unusual child. I sort of understood death in a lot of ways, yeah. I understood death at a young age. I didn't have language for it, but I knew it wasn't the end of the world, as Richard Bach says. I had no living grandparents growing up, but I did have a great aunt, and we called her Auntie, and she was the model in my life for elegance, poise, wisdom, intelligence in a female version. She died at 9. In those short years, she had huge impact on me, and of course I was sad. She lived in an apartment behind my home for part of my young life. And so I was very close to her. By this time, she'd moved to Seattle, which is about 3 hours away from my hometown. And I can remember the day after she died, my aunt and my mother's sister and family had come, and then they were all going to Seattle. And I can remember the adults talking. Now I'm 9 years old. So my favorite place was behind the doorway, listening. And I remember them talking about, they thought I was too young to be exposed to the idea of going to funerals and death and cremation and, all the stuff. And their sadness, I'm sure, was part of it. They needed to protect little Margie from that. And so they left me at home, and they went off, and I can remember thinking, well, silly parents. What are you going to do with parents? Gee whiz, there's no big thing going on here. She's just taking the next part of her journey. If I know that, why don't my parents know that? Huh? My father died when I was 25. I would have loved to have had him around a lot more years, but it was okay that his time was done. Maybe that was because he left through the vehicle of cancer. And God knows you want somebody to be free of that experience, someone you love. And so I was the one person in the family who wasn't entirely devastated and kept everybody else moving forward in those difficult weeks because I knew he was okay. I had a preference. I'd have rather him be here, but I knew he was okay. A couple of decades later, my mother dies. So she's now mid-80s. She has lived a fabulous life, including the years after my dad's death, which were hard for her, of course, at first, but she had extremely wonderful adventures in those years of widowhood when the family all took care of her, took her traveling. She just lived a fine life. She didn't have an illness. She died of what a nurse friend of mine called the dwindles. She just reached an age where the body was given out, and it was slowly coming to an end. And we found ourselves in the hospital in those last days, and the family all around her. And we came to know that she was at her end, and so we're all there. And in the last short period of time, we could just watch the body shift through the experience of the spirit moving from the physical to what was left, which was not my mother's essence, just the caterpillar she'd been in for 80-some years. And at the moment her breath stopped, she had been fully alive, quiet, still, fading, we might say, but life was present. There was color in her face, and her cheeks and her hands were warm. At the moment of her last breath, it was like a light switch going off. There was no color. There was no warmth in her hands. Instantly, we knew she was gone completely. It was a fascinating experience, and it was a gift to be present, to watch somebody make the transition from one form of living to another form of living. That was a very peaceful experience, and I was honored, and I'm still very grateful to have been there. To know that death does not have to be physically challenging and difficult, that when we're prepared, we just let go and move on. And I trust that there is all kinds of energetic support and love waiting to greet somebody who's moved into the next experience. My first husband loved my family, and we all love him and his new family, and I called him very soon and said, well, Mom has died. And he said, could you tell me what that was like? I've never been with somebody. And so I described, storyteller that I am, I described it in great detail. And then he was quiet. Finally, I said, Dennis, are you there? He said, yeah, I was just thinking what you describe of life leaving instantaneously is the reverse process of what I witnessed when my baby was born. It comes out gray and nothing, and you wonder, uh-oh. And then it takes that first breath, and instantly the whole body is pink. And then the lungs go, and there's noise and movement. And he said it's the same process in reverse. And that's true, I believe, about our experience of living and dying and living and dying. One is just the continuation of the other, and we have often such resistance to it because we love this life. Can't imagine being somewhere else, something else that would be better than this. But it is possible to see the whole arc as our life and accept that the next process comes and maybe even meet it with joy. Myrtle Fillmore so understood the process of life and death that she got into her early 80s and came to her knowing that she was done in the body. She had completed the work she was here to do. This was conscious. She was aware. She spent a couple of days in the office, the world headquarters, speaking to everybody and telling them, my time here in the body is done, and I know it's complete, and so I'm preparing to move on into the transition to the next piece of my living in spirit. And you know what we do. We say, oh, no, honey, Myrtle, you look so vibrant and so well, and you never miss a day of work. Don't leave us. You can't leave us. We so need that connection. But Myrtle knew what Myrtle knew about her own calling and what her soul was ready for the journey. And so she went home. And in less than 2 weeks, in a very peaceful process, she simply turned off the switch and went home. Home to God. She was convinced that her work would continue better from what she called the other side. Boy, if I could get to that point in life with that kind of peace about the next process and the knowing that I'm called to move forward, that I don't have to create a struggle around that experience. Whatever my exit plan looks like, I'm going to be looking for the lights on the aisle to tell me which way to go. But let me go with joy for having been here and joy for being there. Neil also offers this piece of spiritual truth. Death is never a tragedy. It is always a gift. I've had some trouble with the first part of that one. I get the second part very easily. In this book and others, Neil has shared a story demonstrating the truth of this statement. He was holding a workshop on the Conversations with God material, and a large number of people were there, and their final day exercise and activity was sharing what had changed for them in this experience. What was the nugget they were taking away? What was the value of this workshop? And finally, one woman who'd just been kind of like this the whole time finally stood up to share. And she said, I've read your books, and I've listened to all of you for these 3 days talking about the love and the light and God and everything continues. And she said, if that's true, then I am mad at God, and I have been for a very long time. What God that is about love and life continuing would take my 18-year-old son from me on his birthday? You explain that to me, Mr. Walsh. He kind of rocked back on his heels. Now, the story that this woman had presented was she and her husband very much wanted a family, and she couldn't bear children. So they adopted a young boy. They loved this child. This was the most joyful event in their life. 3 weeks later, she found out she's pregnant. So they raised 2 boys together, a birth son and an adopted, and there was no difference in that family between these 2 children. Both showered with love, raised with spiritual truth, loved beyond measure by their parents and their family. When they thought the adopted son was old enough, they told him of this fact. And at school, he shared this information, and you know how sometimes kids can be not so generous and gracious, and they started to tease him about he was such a loser, his mom didn't want him, gave him away. And that sent him into a decade long period of anger and frustration and questioning that upended the beautiful love and harmony of this family. And as the parents tried to nurture the one who now lived with this pain, the only way the mom could soothe her adopted son was to promise him when he reached the age of adulthood, 18, and that he could then request the adoption records, she would do everything she could to help him find his birth mother. Finally, that day arrived, and on the morning of his 18th birthday, he said, "Yes, Mom, I still need that answer. I need to know. I need to put the pieces together. I need to have the puzzle complete." And she said, "Then I'll help you." And he was killed in a motorcycle accident that very day. So this mother stood there railing at Neil Walsh and God about how could that happen if God is a God of love and life goes on forever. Neil was quite taken aback, and I'm imagining in his mind he felt and said something like, "Oh boy, God, I got nothing. You better be up at bat here this next moment." And what came out of his mouth, he said, rung so true that he just spoke it rather than tried to let his mind control it. And his answer to this grief-stricken mother was, "Your son knows the gift of love you have given him all his life. The anger is gone. He knows you made the gift possible for him to meet his birth mother, as well as to experience the immense love of the family that he was raised in. He has met his birth mother because she too was on the other side. She was not on the planet. So the only way that promise could be delivered is through the death of this son." This mother was able to hear and take that in as the gift of the circumstance that she had struggled with much difficulty. Neil reports that the tension just flowed off of her in minutes, and that she was able to speak of this knowing, this truth, to feel just how much a gift the whole experience was. Not just a piece of it, but all the pieces of the circle. So here's my invitation for us. That we look at death squarely. We dive into the deep end of the pool. We talk about the elephant that's in the room. And we know that we are on our way to becoming butterflies. And to come to find the place within our own self where this makes sense to us, where it's the truth from which we can live. Because all I can do is offer you some prodding and encouragement and some thoughts to think about and a little nudging in the direction of deciding for yourself this great truth. Masters can give us wisdom that have stood the test of centuries, but we must feel it in here. This is the place where truth lives and comes to life for each of us, is within our own heart and our own being. So my invitation is to dive in and poke around in this pool and see if you can come to your own truth in your own experience about the full circle of life and of life. So here's the wisdom that I really like. Because I know I'm going toward my butterfly journey. I hope it's a very long way off, but I know I'm heading there, and this is how I intend to continue. Life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Whoa! What a ride! Are you with me on the ride?" Yay! I love my life. Every juicy moment of it, whatever I call it. And I want you to love it too. And when we're no longer frightened, then we will indeed skid in broadside and say, "Whoa, what a ride." Breathe that in with me. Come into this moment with your wonderings, your questions, your fears, your not being sure. and come into the space at the heart of your very essence where God and you are in connection. And know that all that will serve you is present within you. You only need to ask, invite, and God is there with love and light and wisdom. So come with all that you are into the silence with God.